So, today we'll be learning about King Richard III of England. Now, he was born 2nd October 1452 in Northamptonshire to, excuse me for a moment while I look at my notes, to Richard, who was the 3rd Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. Now, King Richard III is often described as a man who is evil and had a hunchback, and also killed his nephews, the princes in the Tower. Now, maybe he did kill the princes, but he was definitely not a hunchback. In fact, he only had scoliosis, which did cause a sideways curvature in his spine. But I digress. We must get on with his story. In 1460, when he was about eight years old, his father and eldest brother were killed in the Battle of Wakefield, which was a trick. Which the only reason they were killed was treachery on the part of the Lancastrian forces, who had pretended to send deserters, who had pretended to have some units desert to the York side, and when Richard sallied out to defeat them, they surrounded him and he was killed. Now, he and his brother George were sent by their mother to the Low Countries, which was the Netherlands at the time, which is now known as the Netherlands. And they returned to England following the defeat of the Lancastrian forces at the Battle of Taunton, which was one of the bloodiest battles, I believe, of the War of the Roses. At his brother's coronation, which happened on the 28th of June, 1461, he was named Duke of Gloucester and made a Knight of the Garter and a Knight of the Bath, and was also made the sole commissioner of array for the Western Counties in 1461, when he was only 11, and by the age of 17 he had an independent military command. He would spend several years of his childhood at Middleham Castle in Yorkshire, under the tutelage of his cousin Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick, who was later known as the Kingmaker. Now, here's where some incest comes in. While he was there, he met his future wife, Anne Neville, Warwick's younger daughter. Now, Edward IV would not permit his brothers marrying Warwick's daughter. In fact, George was the only one to marry one of Warwick's daughters during his lifetime without the permission of the king. George would end up later rebelling against Edward, and Richard stayed loyal, though it is also rumored he may have been having an affair with Anne. In 1470, Richard and Edward fled to Burgundy in October, after Warwick, the Kingmaker, defected to the Lancastrian side. In fact, the only reason this most likely happened was because Richard's sister Margaret married the Duke of Burgundy, who was Charles the Bold. The brothers expected a welcome there. Edward was restored to the throne in spring of 1471, following the battles of Barrack and Tewkesbury, in which the 18-year-old Richard played a key role. It is most likely that during the Battle of Barnet, which was his first command, he may have led the vanguard, which he outflanked the wing of Henry Howard, who was the third Duke of Exeter. Although his although the degree to which his command was fundamental may be exaggerated, though Richard's personal household did sustain losses, which indicates he was in the thick of the fighting. A contemporary source is clear about that during the Battle of Tewkesbury, he held the vanguard for his brother Edward, which, which he was deployed against the Lancastrian vanguard under Edmund Beaufort, 4th Duke of Somerset, who I am related to. In fact, I am related to both of these men. I am related to many of the men we will most likely be talking about in this. 2 days later, he was appointed as a Constable of England. He sat along John Howard as Earl Marshal in a trial which sentenced leading Lancastrians who were captured after the battle. In 1475, Richard would be a large would command a large private contingent of his brother's army in an invasion of France. Though I have not found any sources that say there were any battles during this. On May of on on the 12th of May, 1480, he was appointed Lieutenant General of the North. As fears of a Scottish invasion grew, Louis XI of France had attempted to negotiate an alliance with France with the aims of attacking the English. Now, this is all coming from a French chronicler. Richard summoned the border levies and issued commissions of array to repel border raids. Together with the Earl of Northumberland, he had launched counter raids to counter the Scottish raids. And when his brother the king and his council formally declared war, he was granted £10,000 as wages. The king did not arrive and failed to arrive to lead the army, and the result was basically just skirmishing until early 1482. Richard witnessed a treaty with Alexander, who was the Duke of Albany, which was brother of James III of Scotland. Northumberland, Stanley and Dorset, and Sir Edward Woodville and Richard, on the English side, with approximately about 20,000 men, took the town of Barrack almost immediately. The castle held until 24th of August, 1482, when Richard recaptured Barrack upon Tweed from Scotland, although it is debatable whether the English victory is more due to internal Scottish divisions rather than Richard's military prowess. It was the last time that the royal borough of Barrack was exchanged hands between the two realms. On the death of his eldest brother, on the death of Edward, on the death of Edward on the 9th of April, 1483, he was named his Edward's 12-year-old son, Edward V, succeeded him. Richard was named Lord Protector of the realm. Richard informed Edward of a plot aimed at denying him his role as protector, and whose perpetrators had been dealt with. He escorted the king to London, which they entered the city on May 4th. Richard first accommodated Edward in the bishop's apartment, then, on Buckingham's suggestion, the Duke of Buckingham, which was Henry Strafford, the king was moved to the royal apartments of the Tower of London, where kings customarily awaited their coronation. Within the year 1483, Richard had moved himself to Crosby Hall, which is in London. Robert Fabian wrote in his new Chronicle of England and France that the Duke caused the king to be removed from the Tower and his brother with him, and the Duke lodged himself in Crosby's palace in Bishopsgate Street. The Dowager Queen, after hearing of her brother's arrest on the 30th of April, fled to Westminster Abbey, which was joined by her son by her first marriage, Thomas Grey, who was the first Marquess of Dorset, her 5 daughters, and her youngest son, Richard of Shrewsbury, who was the Duke of York. On Friday the 13th in June, on the Tower of London, Richard accused Hastings having conspired against them. Hastings was taken out of the council chambers and executed, according to Thomas More. Others, like Lord Thomas Stanley and John Morton, who was the Bishop of L, were arrested. Hastings was not attainted, and Richard sealed an indenture that placed Hastings' widow Catherine directly under his own protection. Bishop Morton was released into the custody of Buckingham. On the 16th of June, the Dowager Queen agreed to hand over the Duke of York to the Archbishop of Canterbury so that he might attend Edward V's coronation, which was planned for June 26th. 22nd. A clergyman who is believed who who is Bishop Robert Stillingham, is said to have informed Richard that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid because of an earlier union with Eleanor Butler, which made Edward V and his siblings illegitimate. The identity of this informant, known only through the memoirs of a French diplomat, who was named Philip de Comines, was Robert Stillingham, who was the Bishop of Bath and Wells, as I mentioned earlier. On Sunday, the 22nd of June, a sermon was preached outside Old St. Paul's Cathedral by a man named Robert Shaw, who declared that Edward IV's children, bastards, and Richard the rightful king. Shortly after, London citizens, who were both noble and common, convened and drew up a petition asking Richard to take the throne. He accepted, and on June 26th was crowned at Westminster. He accepted on June 26th, and on July 6th he was crowned at Westminster Abbey. In January 1484, Parliament did confirm that he was king. The princes lodged in the royal residence, who were lodged in the royal residence at the time of coronation, disappeared from sight after the summer of 1483. Although Richard is accused of having them killed by More and Shakespeare, we do not know what happened. Perhaps it was Buckingham, perhaps it was Henry VII, but Richard still is a suspect. He would marry Anne he married his queen Anne in 1472 before he became king. Forgot to mention that earlier. In 1483, Buckingham rebelled. As Buckingham had proposed that Henry Tudor should have Richard returned from exile to take the throne, Mary Elizabeth, who was the eldest daughter of Edward IV. However, it has also been pointed out that this narrative stems from Richard's own parliament. It should most likely be treated with caution. Buckingham relayed his substantial force from Wales, from his estates in Wales and the Marshes. Henry, in exile in Brittany, enjoyed the support of the Breton treasurer Pierre Ladys, who hoped Buckingham's victory would cement an alliance between Brittany and England. Some of Henry's ships ran into a storm and were forced to return to either Brittany or Normandy, while Henry himself anchored off Plymouth for a week before learning that Buckingham had failed. Buckingham had his army desert him during the storm and tried to escape in disguise, but that was turned in by one of his retainers for a bounty, or was discovered in hiding with him. He was convicted of treason and beheaded in Salisbury near the Bull Head Inn on November 2nd. His widow, Catherine Woodville, later married the uncle of Henry Tudor, Jasper Tudor. Richard made overtures to Ladys, who offered military support for his weak regime under Francis II, who was Duke of Brittany. In exchange for Henry fled to Paris, in which he secured support from the French regent, who was Anne of Anjou, who supplied troops for his invasion of 1485. This set the stage for the Battle of Bossworth, which happened on Monday, 22nd, 1485. Richard met the outnumbered forces of Henry at Bossworth. Richard rode a white courier, which is extremely swift and fast horse. Richard's army is estimated to have been at 8,000, Henry's at 5,000, but exact numbers are not known. But the royal army did substantially outnumber Henry's. The king cried treason during the battle. The traditional view of this was that it was banned by the Baron Stanley, Sir William Stanley, and Henry Percy. However, the role of Northumberland, who was Percy, is unclear. His position was with the reserve, and could not have moved in without general royal advance, which did not take place. However, the personal confines behind the crest of the Albion Hill, combined with difficulties of communication, hampered his events to join the fray. Richard did indeed lead a cavalry charge deep into his ranks, attempting to kill his enemy. Richard most likely fought bravely. All accounts say that Richard fought very bravely during this, unhorsing Sir John Cheyne, a well-known jousting champion, killing Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, and coming within a sword's length of Henry, before being surrounded by Sir William Stanley's men and killed. Peldor Virgil, Henry VIII's official historian, recorded that King Richard alone was killed fighting manfully in the thickest press of the enemy. The Burgundian chronicler, Jean Mornet, states that a Welshman struck the death blow with a halberd, while Richard's horse was stuck in the marshy ground. It's said that the blows were so violent that the king's helmet was driven into his skull. But for all we know, the man only had we don't know who killed him. It could have even been Henry himself. In 2013, after it had been exhumed, the body showed 11 wounds, 8 of them to the skull, suggesting he had lost his helmet. After the battle, Richard's naked body was carried back to Leicester tied to a horse. It was displayed in the Church of the Annunciation of Our Lady in Newark prior to being discreetly buried in Greyfriars Church in Leicester. Henry VII paid £50 for a marble and alabaster monument to Richard. According to a discredited tradition, during the dissolution of the monarchy, his body was thrown into the river Source. But his body was found in 2012 in the in at the parking lot of in Greyfriars Church, and he was eventually reentombed in Leicester Cathedral. His remains were put there in the 15th, the 22nd of 5th, 2015, and reburied the next day at a religious reburial at which include the Bishop of Leicester, Tom Simons, and Justin Walbury, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. The British royal family were represented by the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester and the Countess of Wessex. Benedict Cumberbatch, who had portrayed him in the Hollow Crown television series, read the poet by poet laureate Karen L. Duffy. Now I will talk about his issue, and then this shall end. Richard had one son with his wife, Anne, Edward of Midhelm, who was born somewhere between 1474 and 1476, and was made Earl of Salisbury on 15th of February 1478 and Prince of Wales on 24th of August 1484, but he would die in March of the next year. Richard acknowledged two of his two illegitimate children, John of Gloucester and Kathleen Plantagenet, also known as John of Ponteverit. John was appointed captain of Calais the same year his father would have died. Catherine married the second Earl of Pembroke. Well, I believe that wraps this up. And remember, always keep on the lookout for history. Bye.